For as long as humans have gazed at the stars, we have wondered, are we alone, or do other worlds exist beyond the edge of our sight? The multiverse, the idea that our universe might be just one of many universes or worlds, sounds like a cutting-edge concept. Yet it is anything but new. In fact, the notion that reality could encompass multiple worlds has deep roots stretching back thousands of years. Across cultures and centuries, philosophers, theologians, and visionaries have toyed with the possibility that the cosmos is bigger and more varied than the single world we know. The story of the multiverse is a human story, a tale of curiosity, heresy, wonder, and the gradual expansion of our perspective. Before we begin, a note on terminology. Worlds can mean different things in different eras. To ancient thinkers, many worlds might mean multiple cosmoses coexisting or cycling through time. In later ages, it often meant other planets or Earth-like realms beyond Earth. Today, it can mean entirely separate universes with their own stars and laws of nature. Throughout this journey, we'll use terms like worlds, universes, and cosmos somewhat interchangeably, focusing on the broad idea of plurality of worlds, the notion that reality is not singular. Our exploration begins in antiquity, where the earliest recorded ideas of multiple worlds emerged. Over 2,500 years ago, Greek philosophers were already debating whether our world was unique or one of many. This was not science as we know it, but deep philosophical inquiry combined with early observations of nature. Two influential schools of thought in particular planted the seeds of the multiverse concept, the atomists and the Stoics. The atomists, infinite worlds in an infinite void. In the 5th century BCE, philosophers Leucippus and Democritus proposed that everything is made of indivisible particles called atoms moving in an infinite void. With limitless space and countless atoms colliding randomly, these thinkers argued it was not only possible, but inevitable that atoms would combine in numerous ways to form not just one world, but infinitely many worlds. In their view, some worlds would be like our own, while others could be quite different or even grotesque, some lacking sun or moon, some inhabited, others not. These worlds all exist simultaneously, scattered throughout the boundless void. The Roman poet Lucretius, an Epicurean, follower of atomist Epicurus, later vividly described this doctrine of innumerable worlds in his poem On the Nature of Things. To the atomists, our cosmos was no special center of creation, just one cosmic accident among countless others. One anecdote tells of the philosopher Anaxarchus comforting Alexander the Great by saying, "There are infinite worlds," leading Alexander to weep because he hadn't even conquered one world yet. The idea of innumerable parallel worlds was born as a natural extension of believing in an infinite universe. The Stoics, one world at a time, but forever. In contrast to the atomists, the Stoic philosophers of later centuries, around 3rd century BCE, believed in a single orderly cosmos per cycle, one world, but with a twist. It recurs eternally. The Stoics taught that the universe is pervaded by a divine soul or fire, and it periodically perishes and is reborn. The great Stoic thinker Chrysippus argued that the cosmos we see will eventually dissolve in a grand conflagration, a cataclysmic fire, returning everything to a primordial state, and then the cosmos will form again exactly as before. This cycle repeats endlessly. While Stoicism didn't imagine multiple worlds coexisting at once, it did introduce the idea of multiple iterations of the world across infinite time. In effect, it was a precursor to thinking about multiple universes in a temporal sense. Each universe dies, and another is born, world without end. Interestingly, these cyclic and parallel universe ideas from the atomists and Stoics aren't mutually exclusive. Later thinkers would combine aspects of both, infinite worlds in space, each undergoing cycles of creation and destruction. It wasn't only the Greeks who pondered multiple worlds. Ancient Indian philosophies also conceived a vastly plural cosmos. In Hindu cosmology, the universe is not a one-time event but an eternal cycle, samsara, of births and deaths of cosmic epochs. Texts describe countless universes existing simultaneously, each living out a cycle lasting billions of years. The Hindu concept of the Brahmanda, cosmic egg, envisions our universe as one bubble in a froth of infinite others, each created and dissolved in the dance of the divine. Meanwhile, early Buddhist philosophers around the 1st century CE also argued for a plurality of worlds. They wanted to explain the cosmos without invoking a single first cause or creator. Their solution was that our world is just one of many parallel worlds, each with its own endless cycle of birth, existence, and destruction. In other words, even the ancients of India imagined a multiverse, a web of world systems arising, decaying, and arising again ad infinitum. While these ancient visions of many worlds were remarkably bold, they existed alongside opposing views. The most influential critic was the Greek philosopher Aristotle, 4th century BCE. Aristotle's ideas would dominate educated thinking for centuries to come, and he firmly declared there is only one world. In his work on the heavens, Aristotle gave what seemed like logical proofs that multiple worlds were impossible. He argued that all matter naturally gathers toward a single center. Thus, if there were another Earth, where would its heavy elements fall, toward our Earth or theirs? The notion made no sense to him. Aristotle also believed space was finite, a closed sphere with Earth at the center and the stars on the outermost crystal sphere. With no infinite void, there was no room for other worlds beyond the one heavens we see. He and his disciples, like later commentator Plato, held that the uniqueness of Earth and the cosmos was part of the natural order. This one-world view was neat, finite, and aligned nicely with later religious doctrines. Indeed, Aristotle's singular cosmos dovetailed with the idea of a single creation by a single God, which made it attractive to medieval theologians. As we shall see, Aristotle's authority was so great that, for over a millennium, any talk of plural worlds was largely squelched or driven underground. To summarize the ancient stage, some early thinkers dared to imagine infinity, infinite space, infinite time, infinite worlds. Others, like Aristotle, insisted on a closed, singular cosmos. This tension between an expansive vision of countless worlds and a conservative view of a unique world set the scene for all future debates. The multiverse idea, in nascent form, was already planted in humanity's imagination, but for it to grow, it would have to survive the strict confines of dogma in the ages to come. Next, we will see how the world of the Middle Ages, dominated by religious thought, dealt with the inheritance of these Greek ideas. As we move into the Middle Ages, the torch of learning passed through different cultures and eventually into the hands of Christian and Islamic theologians. During this period, roughly 5th to 15th centuries, questions about multiple worlds were usually framed in religious terms. The dominant view, following Aristotle and the Church, was that God created one world, ours, as the unique stage for the human drama of salvation. Yet even under this one-world orthodoxy, thinkers could not resist asking, could God have made other worlds if he wanted? And if other worlds exist, what would that mean for our beliefs? The result was a series of intriguing theological debates. Let's explore how both the Islamic and Christian medieval worlds grappled with the idea of multiple universes. Islamic perspectives, Lord of the worlds. In the Islamic Golden Age, 8th to 12th centuries, scholars avidly studied Greek philosophy and often went beyond it. The Quran itself calls God Rabb al-Alamin, meaning Lord of the worlds, in several verses, hinting that multiple worlds may be part of creation. Some medieval Muslim thinkers took this idea and ran with it. For example, Fakhr al-Din al-Razi, a prominent Persian theologian and scholar, 1149 to 1209, openly rejected Aristotle's idea of a single earth-centered universe. In his writings, al-Razi argues that there could be 1,000,000 worlds beyond this world, each larger than our own, with their own creatures and conditions. He cites the Quranic title of God as evidence. Why say worlds in plural if only our world exists? Another early Muslim thinker, Imam Muhammad al-Baqir, 7th to 8th century, is quoted as saying that God created thousands and thousands of worlds and thousands of humankind. We should not assume we're the only humans or the only world. These theological views weren't mainstream doctrine, but they show that cosmic pluralism found a footing in medieval Islamic thought. It's remarkable that at a time when Europe was sticking closely to Aristotle, some Islamic scholars felt free to envision innumerable worlds as a testament to God's creative power. In the realm of literature, even the fantastical tales of the 1001 Nights, Arabian Nights, toyed with the concept. One story describes a cosmos of different worlds, some larger than Earth, each with their own inhabitants. Clearly, the seed of the multiverse idea survived in the fertile soil of the Muslim intellectual world, framed as God's unlimited creation. Christian scholastics, could God create other worlds? Meanwhile, in medieval Europe, the discussion of multiple worlds was tightly bound to Christian theology. The prevailing wisdom, influenced by Aristotle and church doctrine, was that there is one universe with Earth at its center, as described by Ptolemy's geocentric model. Medieval scholars, the scholastics, posed the question carefully. They did not assert other worlds existed. That would attract charges of heresy. But they asked whether it was possible for God to create more worlds. After all, God is omnipotent. Are we to say he couldn't make another world if he wished? This line of inquiry led to some surprising twists. The great theologian St. Thomas Aquinas, 13th century, tackled exactly this in his Summa Theologica. Aquinas ultimately concluded that in reality, there is only one actual world, because all of creation is a single ordered unity. He argued that everything in the universe is interlinked in one grand design under God, so multiple disconnected universes would not fit the harmonious order God chose. However, Aquinas admitted God's power is without limit. Theoretically, God could make many worlds, but he asserted that those who claim many worlds actually exist are usually people who do not acknowledge an ordaining wisdom. He even cites the atomist Democritus by name as an example. In essence, Aquinas and others drew a line between God's absolute power, what God could possibly do, and God's ordained power, what God chose to do. They believed God could have created multiple worlds, but in fact chose to create only this one, often adding that those who think many worlds exist are mistaken or guided by chance rather than divine order. This somewhat abstract theological stance took a dramatic turn in the year 1277. In Paris, Bishop Étienne Tempier issued a famous condemnation of certain Aristotelian propositions that were deemed to limit God's power. One of the condemned ideas was the assertion, derived from Aristotle, that God could not create more than one world. The bishop declared it illegal for Christians to claim God's power was so restricted. In effect, the church officially said, if God wants to make multiple universes, he can. This did not mean people believed multiple universes actually existed. It was more about affirming omnipotence, but it opened the door for scholars to speculate about other worlds without falling afoul of doctrine. The edict pointedly avoided saying there are other universes, but by stating it's wrong to deny God could have made them, it granted intellectual permission to explore the idea. The historian James Hannam notes that after 1277, natural philosophers could consider non-Aristotelian possibilities, like vacuum space or multiple worlds, as long as they couched it as hypothetical exercises of God's power. Thus, in a curious way, a church condemnation intended to uphold God's freedom actually revived interest in pluralism. Scholars like Nicole Oresme, a 14th century bishop, and Nicholas of Cusa, 15th century cardinal, cautiously wrote about the possibility of many worlds. Nicholas of Cusa, for example, suggested that Earth was not the center of the universe, and he mused that the stars could be other suns with their own planets, and perhaps even their own inhabitants, ideas quite radical for a Catholic cardinal in 1440. He even entertained that beings on those other worlds would be unknown to us, but still part of God's creation. Such musings stayed theoretical, but they show the medieval multiverse was being pondered in the mind of Christendom, albeit behind careful phrasing. Despite these sparks of speculative thought, it's important to emphasize that through most of the Middle Ages, the idea of multiple worlds was not mainstream. It hovered in the realm of hypotheticals and theological what-ifs. The vivid imagery of the time reinforced a unified cosmos. As shown in the illustration above, Earth was envisaged at the center of concentric heavens, the singular focus of God's plan. The possibility of other worlds was mostly a topic for rarefied debate, not a popular belief. Indeed, when medieval people spoke of other worlds, they often meant spiritual realms, heaven, hell, purgatory, which were different planes of existence, but not physical universes like ours. Those were certainly multiple worlds in a religious sense, but they were seen as part of the one creation, not separate cosmoses. An example is Dante Alighieri's Divine Comedy in the 14th century, mapping multiple realms of afterlife, yet all tied to one universe and one God's judgment. By the late medieval period, we have a paradoxical situation. Philosophers are allowed to imagine multiple worlds, but few openly insist they are real. The Church's stance is, one actual world, please, but God could have made others. That cautious opening, however, set the stage for the revolution to come. As the medieval era gave way to the Renaissance, the question shifted from, can God create other worlds, to, do other worlds actually exist in the cosmos? And that change was propelled by new discoveries that would forever alter humanity's cosmic perspective. The Renaissance, 15th to 16th centuries, was a period of rediscovery, exploration, and challenging old authorities. Nowhere was this more evident than in astronomy and cosmology. As scholars gained access to lost ancient works and new scientific instruments, like the telescope, the cozy, geocentric cosmos of the Middle Ages started to crack open. Nicholas of Cusa, early Renaissance visionary. Before Copernicus, an unlikely source revived the plurality of worlds discussion. Nicholas of Cusa, a German cardinal and polymath. In 1440, he wrote On Learned Ignorance, which mused about the relative insignificance of Earth in the grand scheme. Cusanus proposed that the universe has no fixed center, or rather, every point could be its center, since it is boundless, an idea echoing earlier notions and prefiguring future ones. He speculated that the stars are not just lights on a sphere but distant suns. He even wondered if those stars have their own Earths orbiting them, and whether those worlds might be inhabited by creatures of their own, praising God in their ways. Life, as it were, exists in many places, he suggested. For a high-ranking clergyman, these ideas were astonishingly ahead of their time. Nicholas of Cusa's writings did not spark immediate upheaval. They were dense and philosophical, but later thinkers like Giordano Bruno would cite him as an influence. It shows that by the 15th century, the taboo on multiple worlds was lifting, and some churchmen themselves entertained expansive cosmologies. Nicholas carefully framed it within God's infinite creativity, which likely shielded him from accusations of heresy. Copernicus, one sun, many planets, 1543. A major turning point came with Nicholas Copernicus, the Polish astronomer who in 1543 published On the Revolutions of the Heavenly Spheres. Copernicus's heliocentric model removed Earth from the center of the universe and made the Sun the center, at least of the planetary orbits. While Copernicus himself did not claim multiple suns or multiple universes, his system radically broadened the scope for thinking about other worlds. Earth was now just another planet, a world similar to the other planets like Venus or Jupiter. This immediately raised a question. If Earth is a planet that can support life, could those other planets be worlds with their own inhabitants? Copernicus hinted at this, suggesting it was not absurd to think the moon's terrain could be similar to Earth's, implying perhaps it could be a world of its own. His followers certainly took the idea and ran. The Copernican shift made the plurality of worlds more plausible to imagine because it turned the stars into potentially distant suns. If the Earth was one of many planets, then why couldn't those be worlds? And what of the stars? Copernicus still held the sphere of stars as a boundary, but some later Copernicans mused that the stars might be other suns at great distances. Thus, Copernicus lit the fuse that would lead to an explosion of pluralistic thinking. Giordano Bruno, Infinite Worlds and Heresy, 1584. If any one person can be credited or blamed for loudly proclaiming a true multiverse idea in the Renaissance, it is Giordano Bruno. Bruno was an ex-monk from Italy who became an itinerant philosopher, and in 1584 he published On the Infinite Universe and Worlds. In this work, Bruno broke with not only the Catholic Church's orthodoxy, but even Copernicus's careful conservatism. He declared, "The universe has no center and no edge. It is infinite, and within it exists an infinity of worlds of the same kind as our own." He explicitly wrote that the stars we see at night are other suns. each likely surrounded by its own planets, worlds, and that an infinite number of Earths revolve around those suns. Bruno even indulged in describing these other worlds. Some might have life, perhaps even beings like those on Earth, though he also speculated on fantastical variations. This was a striking revival of the ancient atomist idea of innumerable worlds, but now argued not just philosophically, but as a cosmological reality consistent with Copernicus. Bruno found it sublime that God's creation would be boundless and teem with life. It magnified the glory of the divine in his eyes. He wrote, "There are countless suns and countless Earths all rotating around their suns, just as the 7 planets of our solar system do around our sun, at a time when most still weren't sure the Earth even moved." Bruno's reward for these bold proclamations was tragic. His ideas were deemed heretical by the Catholic Inquisition. Not only had he removed Earth from the center, he had effectively removed the uniqueness of Christ's incarnation on Earth by positing other inhabited worlds, a deeply unsettling implication for theologians. Would those aliens have their own Christ? Bruno speculated maybe yes. After refusing to recant his beliefs, Bruno was burned at the stake in 1600, with the charges against him including his cosmological heresies. Bruno became a martyr for free thought and the idea of infinite worlds. It's important to note that Bruno's execution had multiple causes. He held unorthodox theological views on other matters too, but his advocacy of an infinite universe with infinite worlds was certainly a major part of the case against him. The Church was not ready to accept such a limitless cosmos. Bruno's books were placed on the index of forbidden works. Yet, as often happens, ideas cannot be burned so easily. His vision of an infinite populated cosmos continued to circulate in intellectual circles, inspiring others in quieter ways. Galileo, Kepler, and others. After Bruno, even mainstream astronomers became more open to multiple worlds, albeit cautiously. Galileo Galilei, 1564 to 1642, with his telescope, observed mountains on the Moon and moons orbiting Jupiter, discoveries that showed other celestial bodies could be worlds in their own right. The Moon had a landscape. Jupiter's moons were like a mini-planetary system. Galileo wrote in 1632, "I have observed that the Moon has a surface rough and uneven and similar to the Earth's, so that it seems it surpasses the Earth in no quality other than being inhabited by creatures perhaps different from ours." He stopped short of claiming the Moon was inhabited, but he planted the suggestion. Johannes Kepler, 1571 to 1630, the great German astronomer, while devout, entertained the idea in his science fiction short story Somnium, written 1608, published 1634, of a journey to the Moon and speculated on lunar inhabitants, a way to explore pluralism imaginatively without angering the Church. Kepler's scientific work focused on planetary orbits, but privately he wondered if other stars had planets too. He wrote, "If Jupiter has 4 moons, why couldn't the other stars be centers of similar systems?" He also pondered if those planets would be adorned with wonderful creations, i.e., life, though he often concluded that was known only to God. The Renaissance and early scientific revolution thus saw the plurality of worlds evolve from a forbidden thought to an exciting possibility, discussed in salons and studies across Europe. By 1600, the concept of multiple worlds had shifted from blasphemous to increasingly reasonable among forward thinkers. One might summarize the Renaissance contribution as follows. Copernicus made it conceivable by demoting Earth. Bruno made it infinite by removing all limits. Galileo and Kepler made it tangible by finding Earth-like qualities in the heavens. The stage was set for the Enlightenment, when the idea of many worlds would become not only acceptable, but even fashionable in educated society. In the 17th and 18th centuries, during the Enlightenment, the idea of numerous worlds, particularly in the form of many inhabited planets, became widespread. What was once heresy was now a topic of best-selling books and lively debate in coffee houses. Thinkers during the Enlightenment prized reason, and many saw the notion of countless worlds teeming with life as a rational extension of the Copernican discovery. It also fit with the deistic view of God as a grand architect who wouldn't waste the vastness of space on a single little globe of people. Fontenelle's Conversations on the Plurality of Worlds, 1686, a landmark in popularizing the New World View, was a delightful book by French author Bernard Le Bovier de Fontenelle. In 1686 he published Entretien sur la pluralité des mondes, Conversations on the Plurality of Worlds. Written in French, not Latin, for the educated layperson, it presented a series of elegant dialogues between a philosopher and a marquise, strolling under the stars and discussing the possibility that the planets are inhabited. Fontenelle explained Copernican astronomy accessibly, and then speculated, with charming wit, about the nature of life on the Moon, on Venus, on the moons of Jupiter, etc. This book was immensely successful and did more than perhaps any other single work to make the plurality of worlds a fashionable idea in salons across Europe. Fontenelle asked, essentially, why should each star not have its own family of planets? And he treated it as a perfectly reasonable, even probable scenario. His timing was perfect. The strict religious censorship had loosened in France, and the public was hungry for new scientific ideas. After Fontenelle, it became almost a mark of sophistication to believe in a populated cosmos. Philosophers and astronomers buy in. By the 18th century, many leading minds openly believed in multiple worlds. The English philosopher John Locke, for instance, speculated about the possible inhabitants of Jupiter in his essay concerning human understanding, simply as a thought experiment about how different senses or intellects might be on other planets. The astronomer William Herschel, who discovered Uranus in 1781, was convinced that the sun itself was inhabited by creatures. He conjectured they had adapted to the intense light by having thick protective layers, a notion we find odd today, but it shows how far pluralism was taken. Herschel also assumed the moon and planets were inhabited by analogy with Earth. Even famous political figures were not immune. John Adams and Benjamin Franklin, key figures of the American Enlightenment, stated their belief in a plurality of worlds. Franklin, in particular, a scientist at heart, wrote in 1751 that it's vain to think we are the entire purpose of creation when the scale of the universe is so vast. In country after country, pluralism, as it was called, became the majority view among intellectuals. It was often intertwined with optimism and a sense of God's benevolence. An infinite God would naturally create an abundance of worlds and beings to enjoy existence. Voltaire's satire. Not everyone took the idea reverently. Some used it to probe religious assumptions. The French writer Voltaire was familiar with Newton's physics and the plurality of worlds idea. In his satirical novella Micromégas, 1752, he imagines a giant from a planet orbiting Sirius and his companion from Saturn visiting Earth. They discuss philosophy and the absurdities of human pride, given how tiny humans are in the cosmic scale. This story highlighted the cosmic insignificance of Earth, poking fun at the notion that everything was made for us. Voltaire was also known for mocking Leibniz's philosophy that God created the best of all possible worlds. In his famous novel Candide, 1759, the horrible suffering on Earth is contrasted with the claim it's the best possible, implying maybe, if this is the best world, what must the others be like? Voltaire's wit aside, the Enlightenment saw serious philosophical discussions on why a perfect God would create only one world or many. Leibniz himself, earlier in 1710, had introduced the idea of possible worlds in a theological context to reconcile God's goodness with the world's evils. He argued God, in his mind, conceives of infinitely many possible worlds, but only actualized the best one, ours. Leibniz's possible worlds were a metaphysical idea rather than physical alternate universes, but his work kept the terminology of worlds in intellectual discourse. Some Enlightenment thinkers embraced that maybe all possible worlds exist in reality, not just in the mind of God, but that was a minor view at the time, more akin to later philosophy. Science tightens the standards. As enthusiasm grew, so did calls for evidence. By the late 18th century, a more scientific skepticism was creeping in. The French astronomer Nicolas de Lacaille cautioned that while multiple worlds are an appealing idea, we had no actual proof of life beyond Earth. The discussion began to shift from purely philosophical musing to a proto-scientific question: how to detect or reason about life on other worlds. Nevertheless, actual skepticism of pluralism was relatively rare during the Enlightenment. Most debate was how populated the universe was, not whether. It was a golden age for pluralism. One illustrative figure is Immanuel Kant. In 1755, Kant, then a young scholar, wrote Universal Natural History and Theory of the Heavens. In it, he proposed a nebular hypothesis for the formation of solar systems, envisioning that swirling clouds of gas could form stars and planets naturally. Kant stated plainly his belief that many such systems of stars and planets exist. Essentially, an early intimation of galaxies beyond our Milky Way. He called them island universes. He fully expected these countless planets to be inhabited by living creatures appropriate to their environments. Kant even ranked planets by presumed advancement of their inhabitants, from the crudest on Mercury to the most refined on Saturn. While this was speculative, it shows how integrated the many worlds idea was becoming with emerging science. By the end of the 18th century, cosmic pluralism had transformed from heresy to almost conventional wisdom in educated society. The scientific revolution, with Newton's laws, etc., had expanded minds to infinity in both space and time. It seemed natural that space teemed with worlds. The multiverse concept in modern terms, separate universes, wasn't a focus yet. People assumed one infinite universe containing everything, but within that one universe, they imagined endless solar systems. In a way, this is a multiverse of worlds spread out across our cosmos. However, as we move into the 19th century, we will see the conversation evolve further. The tone shifts from confident speculation to a desire for evidence, and for some, doubt. Additionally, new religious movements and writers continue to engage with the idea. The 19th century will witness both the climax of Victorian-era optimism about alien life and the first signs of scientific rigor that would question these Victorian certainties. During the 19th century, the idea of multiple worlds continued to thrive, but it took on new dimensions. This era saw an explosion of scientific discovery. Geology, biology, and industrial technology changed how people thought about life and the universe. It was also the age of early science fiction, which often used the concept of other worlds as a narrative device. At the same time, religious thought had to adjust to an ever larger universe. Pop science and astronomy. In the 19th century, astronomy made great leaps, e.g. the discovery of Neptune, understanding of nebulae, etc., but direct evidence of life elsewhere was still absent. That didn't stop astronomers from vigorously arguing that life must be widespread. A prime example is the French astronomer Camille Flammarion. He was one of the era's most vocal proponents of cosmic pluralism. In 1862, Flammarion published La pluralité des mondes habités, the plurality of inhabited worlds, the title itself a nod to Fontenelle, but now filled with contemporary scientific reasoning. Flammarion reviewed everything known about the planets, stars, and nebulae, and made a passionate case that nearly all were likely inhabited. He imagined even different forms of life adapted to conditions on Jupiter or the Sun. Like Herschel, he entertained even the Sun might have a cool region for life under its fiery clouds. The book was wildly popular. It went through 33 editions in its first 20 years, reflecting how eagerly the public devoured this theme. Flammarion didn't stop there. He wrote several novels, like Lumen in 1872, using interstellar travel and reincarnation across worlds as themes, blending spiritual philosophy with pluralism. He epitomizes how the 19th century straddled science and imagination. The multiverse, multiple worlds idea lived in both realms. Victorian extraterrestrials. The English scientific community also had its pluralists. Astronomer William Whewell initially was a skeptic of widespread life, writing a cautious piece in 1853 arguing Earth might be unique. He faced backlash from other scientists who accused him of undue pessimism. On the other side, Lord Kelvin, famous for thermodynamics, believed life could travel between worlds, early panspermia idea. Telescopic observations, particularly of Mars, excited public imagination. In the late 1800s, Percival Lowell claimed to see canals on Mars, artificial structures by Martians, he thought. Though later debunked, at the time this was considered serious evidence that another world was inhabited by intelligent beings. Science fiction's first steps. The genre of science fiction truly began blossoming in the late 19th and early 20th centuries, and alternate worlds provided fertile ground. Writers like H.G. Wells crafted stories of visitors from or to other worlds. Wells' The War of the Worlds, 1898, famously depicted an invasion from Mars, reflecting both the belief in Martians and the anxieties of the era. Earlier, his The Time Machine, 1895, took readers to the Earth's far future, essentially another world in time. In 1884, Edwin Abbott's Flatland used the concept of different spatial dimensions as worlds to satirize society. While these fictional works aren't our focus, they indicate that by the turn of the 20th century, the public imagination was fully saturated with the idea of many worlds, whether neighboring planets, far-off star systems, or even invisible dimensions. The idea was no longer confined to academic or theological discussion. It had become part of culture, religious adaptations. Interestingly, the 19th century also saw religion grappling with pluralism in new ways. For instance, the Mormon faith, Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, founded in the 1830s by Joseph Smith in America, included the concept of multiple worlds in its doctrine. Mormon scripture and teaching stated that God created worlds without number and that other planets are inhabited by God's children. In 1843, Joseph Smith taught, "You ask the learned doctors why they say the world was made out of nothing, and they will answer, 'Doesn't the Bible say He created the world?' And they infer from the word create that it must have been made out of nothing." Now, the word create means to organize the world out of chaotic matter. Element had an existence from the time God had. Smith, among others, was comfortable with an infinite creation. Mormon cosmology holds that God the Father himself was once on another world, and we may someday create worlds. This is a fascinating example of a religious movement in the 19th century wholeheartedly embracing a kind of religious multiverse. It set Mormonism apart from mainstream Christianity, which remained more cautious, though by now the Catholic Church had quietly accepted that the earth was not unique in position, but whether life existed elsewhere was considered an open question, as long as it didn't conflict with salvation doctrine. Other Christian thinkers pondered if Christ's salvation would apply to beings on other planets, or if multiple incarnations were possible, a theological puzzle known as the plurality of worlds and the incarnation issue. While not resolved, it shows religion actively engaging with the concept, coining the term multiverse, 1895. It was around this time that the word multiverse itself first appeared, albeit not yet in the scientific cosmos sense. The American philosopher and psychologist William James in 1895 used multiverse to describe the seemingly disconnected and plural nature of experience as opposed to one unified universe of meaning. James said reality might be better described as a multiverse than a universe when it comes to moral and philosophical interpretation. He did not mean multiple physical universes. He meant our world viewed as lacking a single organizing principle. Still, it's interesting that by the end of the 19th century, the language of multiverse was coined to capture a sense of plurality and diversity. As we'll see later, the word would be adopted for cosmic ideas much later in the 20th century, but James' coinage shows how pluralism was in the air conceptually. As the 19th century closed, the intellectual world was generally very optimistic about pluralism. Many assumed the moon was dead, but Mars likely had life, and surely myriad planets around other stars did too. The universe was thought to be full of life and possibly intelligence. However, a shift was coming. The 20th century would bring more stringent scientific methods, and suddenly some would demand proof for these assumptions. Also, new theories in physics would propose entirely new kinds of other universes, beyond just planets, such as extra dimensions or quantum branches. The concept of multiple worlds would move into realms undreamed of by Fontenelle or Flammarion, yet those pioneers set the foundation. The 20th century saw revolutions in physics and cosmology that fundamentally altered our understanding of reality. Concepts like relativity, quantum mechanics, and the Big Bang emerged. Within these groundbreaking theories, the idea of multiple universes found new life, sometimes unintentionally. Scientists grappling with puzzling phenomena occasionally found that assuming our universe is not the only one could resolve certain issues. Meanwhile, the term multiverse was adopted and popularized to describe these scenarios by mid-century and beyond. At the same time, modern philosophy introduced its own twist on many worlds with formal theories of possible worlds and modal realism. Many worlds in quantum mechanics, 1957, One of the most mind-bending scientific proposals for multiple worlds came from quantum physics. In 1957, a young physicist named Hugh Everett III proposed what is now known as the many-worlds interpretation of quantum mechanics. In simple terms, Everett's idea was this: whenever a quantum event has multiple possible outcomes, all outcomes actually occur, each in its own newly created branch of reality. For example, a radioactive atom can either decay or not decay in a given time. According to Everett, there is one universe where it decayed and an entirely separate universe where it didn't. These universes branch off from each other and do not interact. If true, this would mean an ever-branching tree of universes proliferating constantly, containing perhaps every physically possible history. At the time, Everett's idea was met with skepticism or indifference. It seemed extravagant to believe unobservable universes just to interpret quantum math, but it was a serious scientific invocation of a multiverse, though the term multiverse wasn't used by Everett. Over the decades, many worlds gathered some supporters in the physics community. By the end of the 20th century, it became one of the mainstream interpretations of quantum theory taught alongside others, like the Copenhagen interpretation, though it's still unproven and debated. The key takeaway is that modern science introduced the possibility that parallel universes might be spawned by the very laws of physics at the microscopic level, a striking echo of ancient ideas of parallel worlds, but rooted in cutting-edge theory rather than pure philosophy. Cosmological multiverses, inflation theory, 1980s. Another doorway to the multiverse opened from cosmology, the study of the universe as a whole. In the 1980s, cosmologists like Alan Guth and André Linde developed the theory of cosmic inflation. Inflation posits that a fraction of a second after the Big Bang, the universe underwent an extremely rapid expansion. This theory elegantly explained several puzzles, like why the universe is so uniform in all directions. But inflation had an interesting consequence. Depending on how it's formulated, inflation could be eternal and create multiple bubble universes. Linde and others realized that while our observable universe is one bubble that stopped inflating and formed galaxies, elsewhere inflation might continue and periodically pinch off new universes, each bubble potentially having different physical conditions. This idea implies a vast, perhaps infinite, multiverse of bubble universes in a giant cosmic foam. In some versions, these other universes might have different constants of nature or even different dimensionality. We cannot see beyond our own bubble, the observable universe, so these other universes would be forever separate, but their existence could in principle be inferred from theories or maybe subtle traces. This was a profound shift. The word universe traditionally meant everything that exists. Now scientists were casually talking of multiple universes as a natural fallout of a theory. The term multiverse began to be used more frequently in the 1990s and 2000s in this context, describing the collection of bubble universes produced by cosmic inflation, anthropic reasoning, and the multiverse. In the late 20th century, another motivation for believing in multiple universes came from what's called the anthropic principle. Scientists noticed that the laws and constants of physics in our universe are remarkably fine-tuned to allow life. For example, if the force of gravity were slightly stronger or weaker, stars and planets capable of supporting life might not form. One controversial explanation is that perhaps many universes exist with different parameters. And of course, we find ourselves in one of the rare universes where the conditions happen to allow observers like us. This reasoning doesn't prove anything, but it suggests a multiverse could solve the puzzle of why our universe seems so improbably hospitable, because if there are zillions of universes, it's not improbable that one of them had to turn out to be hospitable by chance. Scientists like Martin Rees, Britain's Astronomer Royal, and Steven Weinberg discussed such ideas in the 1990s and 2000s. They argued that if physics eventually indicates a multitude of possible universes, like the inflationary multiverse or a string theory landscape of 10 to the power of 500 solutions, then using the anthropic principle might be unavoidable to explain why we see this particular universe. This was and remains controversial. Some feel it's not testable science, others think it's plausible given the alternatives. Regardless, anthropic reasoning put multiverse discussions into serious scientific journals and conferences by the turn of the 21st century. It was no longer a topic just for thought experiments. It became an attempt to address real scientific questions, like explaining the values of fundamental constants. Philosophical multiverses, modal realism. On a very different front, 20th century philosophy had its own multiverse-like concept. In the 1970s, philosopher David Lewis championed something called modal realism, the idea that all possible worlds are as real as the actual world we live in. According to Lewis, whenever we talk about possible worlds, as philosophers do to discuss how things could have been, we should take it literally. A possible world is a complete concrete reality, existing just as our world does, only not accessible to us. In Lewis's view, there is an infinite ensemble of worlds, each a different way things could have been, populated by their own inhabitants who consider themselves actual, while we to them are merely possible. Lewis even used the term plurality of worlds in his famous 1986 book on the topic, unaware perhaps of how that term was used by Fontenelle centuries before. Now, Lewis's motivation was not cosmology but logic and metaphysics, and many philosophers find his modal multiverse too extravagant to believe literally. Nonetheless, it's a noteworthy modern echo of the idea of parallel realities, reminiscent of ancient ideas of all possibilities being realized. Recall how medieval thinkers argued God can realize all possibilities, and Averroes had a notion that all genuine possibilities must be realized in the world. Here, in late 20th century philosophy, a similar notion appears stripped of theology. While modal realism is a minority view, it adds to the rich tapestry of how the idea of multiple worlds manifested in human thought, even in strictly rational disciplines. By the dawn of the 21st century, multiverse had become a buzzword well beyond academia. In popular culture, of course, which we won't delve into deeply here, the multiverse concept found its way into countless books, TV shows, and movies, a reflection of how our collective imagination has embraced the idea. But crucially, in science, the concept remains speculative yet taken seriously by many. Researchers discuss different levels of multiverse. A level 1 multiverse, simply an extension of our space. If space is infinite, there are other regions so far away we can't see them, effectively other observable universes with perhaps different initial conditions, but same physics. A level 2 multiverse, the bubble universes from eternal inflation, possibly with different physical constants. Level 3, the quantum many-worlds. Level 4, the most radical, perhaps all mathematically possible universes exist, an idea suggested by physicist Max Tegmark. These classifications show how seriously the multiverse is being catalogued and studied, even as empirical evidence is lacking. Critics point out that if other universes don't interact with ours, the theory might be untestable and thus not scientific by strict standards. Proponents counter that we might find indirect evidence. For example, if another bubble universe once collided with ours, maybe it left a pattern in the cosmic microwave background. Researchers have actually searched for such patterns. Today, the multiverse is a topic of both rigorous scientific research and profound philosophical reflection. We have traveled from ancient philosophers randomly guessing about infinite worlds to modern scientists calculating probabilities of universes. So, what is the state of the multiverse idea in the 2020s? Firstly, it's important to clarify that we have no direct evidence of any universe other than our own. All the talk of multiverses remains theoretical. However, these theories are not invented out of thin air. They're often byproducts of well-motivated frameworks, like inflation or quantum theory, that successfully explain many things about our universe. The multiverse emerges as a prediction or implication, which we're then left to wrestle with. This means the scientific community is divided. Some see the multiverse as a likely reality, even if unobservable, that we must accept if our best theories point that way. Others see it as a step too far. They urge caution, saying, let's not multiply universes unnecessarily, especially when they might be forever beyond reach. In mainstream cosmology conferences, you will hear serious talks about the multiverse. For instance, groups of researchers study the so-called string theory landscape, an enormous number of possible vacuum states in string theory, each of which could correspond to a different universe with its own laws. If string theory is right, perhaps our universe is just one random draw from that landscape. Physicists like Stephen Hawking, Brian Greene, and Leonard Susskind have written popular books that include chapters on the multiverse, bringing the discussion to general audiences. On the philosophical side, thinkers debate the probabilistic and existential implications. If there are infinite universes, does that mean every possible person, including another you, exists out there? How do we define reality if so? Some argue this cheapens the meaning of life or uniqueness. Others find it awe-inspiring and humbling, much as Giordano Bruno did centuries ago. Theologians, too, have joined the chat. Modern theology has considered whether a multiverse could be part of God's plan. Some theologians suggest a multiverse actually magnifies creation. God's creative act might naturally produce not one limited world, but an infinite array, reflecting infinite divine possibilities. Others worry it complicates doctrines like the incarnation or the purpose of humanity. The discussion, however, is generally open and curious. Unlike in Bruno's day, discussing multiple worlds is no heresy now. In 2008, the Vatican's chief astronomer even stated that believing in extraterrestrial life, and by extension other worlds with life, is not in conflict with faith, saying, God's creativity is not limited to one planet, a very pluralist-friendly sentiment. One might ask, will we ever prove a multiverse? Some optimistic scientists propose potential evidence. Maybe subtle gravitational effects or specific patterns in cosmological data could imply other universes. Others consider the multiverse more like a philosophical consequence of our theories, something we may never observe directly but can reason is there. And it's possible that future discoveries will roll back the multiverse idea. For instance, a better theory of quantum physics might eliminate the need for many worlds, or a better understanding of cosmology might show only one universe is possible. Science is always evolving. What is clear is that the idea of multiple worlds has proven remarkably durable. From ancient atomists to modern astrophysicists, the allure of more than we can see persists. Humans have always speculated about unseen realms, whether spiritual or physical. The multiverse is, in a sense, a modern scientific twist on a very old impulse, the suspicion that reality is larger and stranger than just what lies in front of us. As we conclude this journey, let's reflect on how far we've come. Once, the Earth was the fixed center of a small, closed universe, created a few thousand years ago. Now we see Earth as a tiny globe orbiting one star among hundreds of billions in one galaxy among trillions. And some ask, might even this immense universe be but one of countless others? Each step in this progression was met with resistance, wonder, and eventually acceptance, at least of the vast scale, if not yet the actual existence of other universes. In a way, we're still tracing our forerunners' steps down the same metaphysical rabbit holes, to borrow a phrase. The ancient Greeks debated infinity and multiple worlds. We debate multiverse theory on forums and conferences. The medieval scholars cautiously allowed for God's power to create many worlds. Today we cautiously analyze theories that predict them. The Enlightenment thinkers happily populated the planets with life. We send rovers to Mars and probes to moons seeking microbes, and telescopes to distant stars seeking exoplanets that might be Earth-like. The context and language change, but the core curiosity remains. The story of the multiverse idea is not a straight line of progress, but a rich tapestry. It weaves through mythology, philosophy, theology, literature, and science. Each era reinterpreted the concept in its own framework, from ancient cosmic eggs to modern bubble universes, reflecting humanity's evolving worldview. At times, the idea of multiple worlds was at the fringes of respectability. At other times, it was almost taken for granted. It has gotten people excommunicated or executed, and it has also won people applause and acclaim. Today, when we hear the word multiverse, it often conjures images of science fiction or cutting-edge physics. But hopefully this historical journey has shown that it's an idea with deep roots. Knowing this, we can better appreciate the multiverse concept not as a sudden, crazy notion of our time, but as part of a long continuum of human thought, a testament to our species' endless quest to understand reality. Will we one day confirm that other universes exist? Perhaps future scientists, or explorers, or even our far-off descendants will find a way to peek beyond our cosmic horizon. Or maybe the multiverse will remain a tantalizing idea, always just out of reach, serving to remind us of the humility and wonder we should maintain when contemplating existence. In the meantime, the concept continues to stimulate our imagination and expand our perspective. As one modern physicist quipped, if we do live in a multiverse, it might be the final Copernican revolution. Not only are we not the center of the solar system, or the galaxy, or even the universe, we might be just one universe in an infinite sea. And yet, that does not diminish us. Instead, it challenges us to find meaning in a richer, more varied reality. From the atomist's infinite collision of atoms giving birth to endless worlds, to the Stoics' eternal rebirth of the cosmos, from the medieval debates about God's freedom to create myriad universes, to Bruno's fiery proclamation of countless suns and earths, from Fontenelle's genteel conversations under the stars, to Flammarion's passionate plea that we are not alone, and from the paradoxes of quantum theory to the vast inflating multiverse of modern cosmology, the idea of the multiverse has proven as boundless as the concept itself. In closing, whether or not we ever find other worlds or universes, contemplating the multiverse has deep value. It forces us to confront the possibility that reality is far grander than the slice we inhabit. It reminds us of the audacity and creativity of the human mind to venture beyond the known, and it ties us in thought to generations long past, who, with far fewer tools, still looked up at the night sky and wondered if somewhere, in those countless points of light, or beyond them, other worlds like ours might exist. The story of the multiverse is ultimately a story about our desire to not be confined, to imagine that beyond the next mountain, beyond the ocean, beyond the stars, beyond the veil of reality itself, there may lie new worlds to discover. And as history shows, as long as we have curiosity, those new worlds, real or imagined, will never cease to beckon us.